1888 was a year of dramatic change in the life of Miami University and Oxford, Ohio. That fall, the youngest president the university has ever had took office, a tall, athletic 27-year-old graduate of Princeton, E.D. Warfield. He brought with him a new faculty, all young men like himself and all from the East. 3 from Princeton, 1 from Yale, 1 from Amherst, another from MIT. The Dude faculty, some Oxford old-timers called them. That same fall, coeducation came to Miami when Ella McShirley was welcomed by President Warfield as the first female student in the university's history. And think of the excitement 2 months later when Miami's own Benjamin Harrison of the class of 1852 was elected the 23rd President of the United States, and Oxford's own Carolyn Scott Harrison, the daughter of a Miami science professor, became the First Lady of the land. Then on December the 8th, another event of consequence took place right here in the grassy area between the old main academic building and the first residence halls. On that day, a group of young men from Miami and another group from the University of Cincinnati lined up against each other for the first ever intercollegiate football game in Ohio, and of course the first ever between these two schools. The game occurred at the instigation of President Warfield, who with Mark Parrott had played football at Princeton. Mark Parrott, a member of the Miami faculty, was joined as well by Jim Bridgman, who had been a football star at Yale. Unfortunately for President Warfield, in a scrimmage earlier that week, he had injured his knee and couldn't play. It was a cold, rainy day. There were few observers.
And it was a very sloppy and an unmarked field as near as I can tell. I don't think they even had the right measurements for a football field. It ended up 0-0. Neither team scored.
The game, as sloppy as it was, ushered in one of the greatest college football rivalries and traditions in America. Over the course of the past century, Miami University has played 830 football games and has won more than 65% of these. Many players and coaches have contributed to this successful record. To mention just a few among the many who have helped make this ultimately the cradle of coaches. I think of Wee Eubank, Paul Brown, Johnny Pont, Ara Precision, Bo Schembechler, Bill Mallory, to name just a few. This then is their story. The story of Miami University football. Truly a century of success.
A tradition was born on that cold afternoon in December of 1888. A month later, Miami challenged UC to a rematch. Football was very informal in the early years. The first paid football coach was not hired until 1895. In 1896, President William Oxley Thompson moved athletics away from the main campus. For $20, the university rented 4 acres of land northeast of campus. The land became known as Miami Field and was first used in 1896 as Miami defeated Earlham College 26-0. Miami Field was to play host to 334 football games before closing 87 years later. Football continued to grow in popularity on the Oxford campus during the gay 90s, but at the close of the 19th century, Miami lost 9 of its last 10 games. Fortunes, though, would change in 1907 as Miami sought the help of Cincinnati attorney Amos P. Foster. Foster lettered in 3 sports at Dartmouth and was hired to bring respectability to the Miami squad. Miami's first true football star, George Booth of Oxford, played on the Foster teams.
George Booth apparently was a great leader and instilled the fighting spirit in his fellow players, and the legend is that he stooped to profanity, and the then president of Miami, Guy Potter Benton, said, "Oh, George, you don't represent the university very well, but That talk, they hear it in the stands. So George gave up profanity the next game, and they lost. And President Benton said, "I guess I was a little hasty."
Over 2 seasons, Miami won 13 of 14 games, shutting out their opponents 9 times. Booth's greatness was followed by that of Russell Baker and Monk Pierce, 2 stars of the first quarter century of Miami football. In 1916, Miami pried George Little away from arch-rival Cincinnati to coach the Big Red team. Little's teams, led by Chief Crawford, George Munns, and Red Blake, played hard-nosed offense and defense. Their sledgehammer style of football netted 239 points while yielding only 12, en route to an undefeated season and the first Ohio Conference title for Miami. In 1917, there was a bigger war to fight than that on the football field. George Little left Miami to join the armed forces. Another George, George Ryder, began coaching in September and fielded a team with only 5 lettermen. But what Ryder's team did that year is unparalleled today. The Big Red went on to outscore their opponents 202-0. 8 shutouts in 8 games and a second straight Ohio Conference crown. In 1918, the Big Red played 6 games and again had an undefeated season. Miami ran its undefeated string to 22, shutting out the opponent in 18 of those games. Miami captured its 3rd straight conference title. In 1919, the war was over and Miami welcomed back their war heroes, including Coach Little. George Little's team lost just once in 1919 while capturing 7 victories. In 1921, Miami won its 4th conference title in 6 years with a perfect 8-0 record. In 6 seasons, the 2 Georges brought prominence to Miami football. Miami became known as the best football team in Ohio. But it was time for George Little to move on. During the 2 Georges' tenure, new heights were reached. All future teams would try to equal the caliber of play established during the golden age of football at Miami. In 1924, after 2 years of 500 ball under Coach Harry Ewing, Coach Chet Pitzer arrived in Oxford. George Ryder returned as athletic director. It was at this time that a new coaching curriculum, only the second of its kind in the country, was established at Miami. Under Pitzer's 8-year tutelage, Miami and its coaching program attracted many greats, including Weeb Ewbank and Paul Brown. Pitzer had an influence on many young men.
Chet Pitzer was a darn good football coach. He was fair, he was tough but fair. And he was a darn good philosopher. There were times, I think all of we've had the experience, he would call up wherever you were living and say, "Look, how are you doing in the studies?" And the work finished. "Okay, I'll be down in 15 minutes. He'd have 3 or 4 fellows in the car with Chief, his dog, and we drive around the county. Talk very little football, all philosophy.
Pitzer's Big Reds were always competitive. Their best season was 1927 when Miami went 8-1.
We had a fairly good team in those days. The Ohio Conference, there was about 20 teams, I think, in the Ohio Conference, and then it looked like some teams, for example, you say, well, you were playing Oberlin then. Well, Oberlin was a pretty good football team in those days.
The game of greatest importance, though, was the annual Thanksgiving Day matchup with the University of Cincinnati.
In this particular game, we got behind, and it was one of those wet days on a Thanksgiving Day in Cincinnati, and I remember getting in the huddle. I'd said we were going to call a fullback right up the middle. They said, "Snake it, snake it." I remember the fellow saying that in the huddle, and so that's the reason I went to that play. But it was a bad day, but coming back in and beating Cincinnati, that was one that sticks out in my mind, and it was my last game, too.
In 1928 and 29, the Miami tandem of quarterback Paul Brown and Olympic speedster Jim Gordon teamed up for an impressive passing attack. They both especially recall a victory over powerful Wittenberg in 1928.
But just before that game, Chet took a telegram out of his pocket, and he read it to us with tears in his eyes. And the essence of the telegram was that Paul's old buddies at Massillon, who were playing for Wittenberg, were going to gang up and get Paul. And so it was our duty as teammates of Paul to protect little Paul. and which we did.
And we won some games that we weren't supposed to win. I can see it because he not only ran a 440 fast, he ran 100 fast. And you'd see the guy try to cover them, and then all of a sudden, there's a question of whether I could throw it far enough.
All week the coaches said, now, Jim, don't look back. You just run as fast as you can, and Paul will get the ball to you, which he did. My God, the ball was right in my hands. I just had to put him up, and there it was. The defensive quarterback who we completed those passes against was Johnny Brickles, who later became athletic director at Miami.
Chet Pitzer's success on the football field leveled off in 1930 and 31, but his influence within the coaching school was vastly realized. At least 21 Miami graduates from the 1920s were already in head coaching positions. Pitzer and Ryder were the pioneers of Miami's cradle of coaches. Frank Wilton, a protege of the immortal Pop Warner of Stanford, became the head football coach in 1932.
That was a transition in Miami football from a more conservative, fundamental, single wingback type of a game to a wide open double wingback, more passing, and a little more variation in the offense.
The explosive style of play paid off immediately as the Redskins won their first ever title in the Buckeye Athletic Association. The conference was formed in 1926 by Miami and 5 other schools from the Ohio Conference. Under Wilton, the Redskins won Buckeye crowns in 1932, 33, and 36. Frank Wilton, who coached for 10 years, enjoyed the longest tenure of any head football coach at Miami. After 7 successful seasons, Wilton's teams produced only 3 victories in the final 3 years. It was now 1942, and the United States had entered World War II. Wilton resigned his position to accept a Navy commission. Stu Holcomb was summoned from Washington and Jefferson College to Oxford to become the Redskins' new head football coach. With the U.S. involvement in World War II, football players at Miami were scarce. For the first time since the early years of football, Miami used freshmen on their varsity squad. The squad was also made up of players from the Navy's B-12 program at Miami. Holcomb and assistant coach Sid Gilman, both Ohio State grads, took this squad of inexperienced players to a 7-2-1 season in 1943. In 1944, Stu Holcomb took a leave of absence from Miami, joining former Miami star Red Blake as his assistant coach at Army. Sid Gilman was named acting head coach. Sid Gilman continued the progress started by Stu Holcomb. Gilman worked feverishly to take a bunch of green athletes and turn them into a top-notch ball club. Gilman's first 2 seasons netted 15 victories. One of Gilman's biggest strengths was that of a recruiter. Gilman diligently worked to make sure that he would get his share of the veterans returning to school under the GI Bill.
We figured out one day that Miami had gone through some 300 football players from the beginning of spring practice.
He knew he was smart enough to know that out of that 250 or 300, he's going to get some pretty good athletes. And he was right, you know. And the summer of '46, I don't know where he found enough uniforms.
Well, our feeling was, if we could just get somebody on the bus and entice him to come to Oxford, there'd be nothing to selling that person on the university, because Miami University, without question, is one of the most beautiful universities in America.
Gilman's success was a product of hard work, innovation, and more hard work.
I think he probably influenced more people that hard work and dedication, whatever you choose, whatever that profession may be. At the time, I didn't know that I was going to be a football coach. And I admired and wondered whether or not I could ever bring myself to the kind of dedication that he and his staff brought to our squad.
We had pre-spring practice football. We had spring practice football, we had post-spring practice football, and then we had pre-fall practice football, fall football, and then post. And we had, you know, Miami had so many fields. We had about 7 or 8 intramural fields. We had movie stands all over the place, and took pictures. We had football all over that campus.
The greatest thing they that I got out of Sid's coaching and coaching with him was the utilization of film. And we started using it as a teaching device. And not only did we take the games, we started taking films of the practice. And you say, well, everybody does that today. They weren't doing it in those days.
Another innovation developed by Gilman and assistant George Blackburn was two-platoon football. The films, the platoon system, and the hard work all paid off. In 1947, star running back Parsegan spurned professional football offers to return for another year of Miami football. And what a year it was. The Redskins had a season that some still say was the best ever. Miami went undefeated in 10 games.
That was a great football team. The highlight, of course, was the good beating that we gave to the University of Cincinnati that year. And Cincinnati was supposed to have been a close game, but it wasn't anything. There wasn't anything close about the game.
After beating UC 38-7, Miami was invited to their first ever postseason bowl game. They flew to El Paso, Texas to take on Texas Tech on New Year's Day, 1948.
We met a very formidable opponent in Texas Tech. They were a hard-hitting group, well-coached team, and they were larger than we were, but I think we were quicker than they. We were not a big football team. That's what I remember about Sid Gilman and his teams, that he stressed quickness and speed and footwork and technique and finesse, those types of things, rather than brute strength. And we were meeting a team probably more of a brute strength team, a power team, a tough defensive team. And ultimately, finesse won out by 1 point.
Finesse may have won out, but some players paid a price. Texas Tech strongmen knocked Parsegan out of the game with a dislocated shoulder. Wayne Gibson received a fractured leg. Doc Urich lost 3 teeth. And guard Nick Brasson left the game with a bad hip. But still, Miami's toughness prevailed.
Never was a pair of ends that were any tougher than Doc Urich and Bud Weber. They were small, but tremendously tough and could catch the ball and run. That was our theme, to be able to run and hit people, and the size didn't mean anything to us. And Eric Parsegan was a great player. Gosh, he was a great player. Paul Schultz, great players. Miami University would be proud, should be proud, of that football team, because they are shining examples of what the university, the exposure of the university, plus the fact what football has done for them.
These Redskins did a lot for football as well. Miami blocked 2 extra point attempts and held on for a 13-12 Sun Bowl championship. This was Miami's first Tomahawk victory. Tomahawks have since been given to teams who rise above their underdog status to knock off the big-time opponent. Miami has been so successful at winning against the odds that they are known throughout America as the Giant Killers. After 4 great seasons, Sid Gilman left Miami to become an assistant under Red Blake.
It was a very tough decision, But I felt that going to West Point with, I was, of course, very selfish and very ambitious at the time. I felt that by going to West Point was a rather strategic move on my part.
But I think as far as the athletic part of it, this Miami tradition, especially in the modern era, was started by Sid Gilman.
I really believe it that Sid started it. Sid and Stu Holcomb and Sid started that. They were winning and winning.
Colonel Red Blake was one of those who was winning and winning. In fact, he won national championships while coaching at Army in 1943, 1944, and 1945. Then to be named the College Football Coach of the Year nationally. Since his success, 6 more Miami graduates have also earned National College Football Coaching of the Year honors. They include Paul Dietzel, while at LSU, John Punt at Indiana, Barry Parsegan at Notre Dame, Jim Root while at Division II in New Hampshire, Bo Schembecker won at Michigan, and Bill Narduzzi at 1AA Youngstown. Woody Hayes, who coached at Miami for 2 years, also was College Coach of the Year while at Ohio State in 1957. At the professional level, Weeb Eubank won world championships in football with the New York Jets, and then with the Baltimore Colts. Paul Brown won a national championship while coaching at Ohio State and won on to Coach of the Year honors while coaching the Cleveland Browns and the Cincinnati Bengals. Incidentally, Smokey Alston, who led the Los Angeles Dodgers to World Series victories, is also a Miami graduate, with more than 100 of its graduates coaching at the professional and college levels, and with more than 500 coaching in high school. Miami University deservedly has gained the reputation of cradle of coaches.
In 1948, assistant coach George Blackburn was elevated to the head coaching position. Blackburn coached for just 1 year, but it was an important year in Miami athletics. Blackburn's Redskins brought the first Mid-American Conference title to Miami.
That team, 48, I thought it was a great team. We lost one ball game, though. Paul Schultz was a tremendous, he was our captain and played left halfback for us. Sam Whipple and Gene Gibson alternated fullback. And we had another fullback come along. Boy, we had football players in those days. And then we had Dr. Olix, Mel Olix. Mel was a fine passer. But we threw the ball. I always liked to throw the ball. Sid liked to throw the ball. A lot of teams weren't throwing the ball that much. You know, they'd maybe throw the ball 10 times in a ball game and think they'd thrown the ball a lot. And we had a fine running team.
After the 1948 season, George Blackburn left Miami to become an assistant under Sid Gilman, who had accepted the head coaching position at arch-rival Cincinnati. In 1949, Wayne Woodrow Hayes left Denison University after 2 undefeated seasons to accept the head spot at Miami. Woody Hayes' first public statement in Oxford was reported to be polite and soft-spoken, but one of Hayes' former players disagrees.
Woody came in, and that was, that was an exciting time because he came in like a tornado, like you would expect, and we had a very tough time the first year, and then the second year we had one of the great teams Miami's ever had.
You'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who played for Woody who would ever have a bad word to say about him.
Volatile, as you know, most people know, but at the same time extremely kind-hearted and intensely interested in academics.
He was a very determined, hard taskmaster in many ways, but he also had a feeling for his players and was concerned if they ever had any problems or if their families had any problems. And unfortunately, I never felt that came out. Certainly winning was everything to him, and I think he sort of rubbed off on all of us.
Hayes, later noted for his 3 yards in a cloud of dust offense, was in his days at Miami an aggressive and gambling coach.
We threw the ball a first down. We were throwing the ball around a lot. We had a great quarterback in Navi Wachowski, and we had a great end in Doc Yorick, and so we threw the ball quite a bit.
I keep remembering one game, and I think we were playing Ohio University. And we were well ahead, and I think the next week we were playing Xavier. And we were standing on the sideline. I remember Jimmy Root, Cleve Rush, and myself, and I guess the game was going on. And right after halftime, Woody left the game while it was ongoing, and flew off to go and scout Xavier. And of course, you know, we were just, what are we going to do? I mean, the head coach has left and the game is still going on, but we managed to struggle through.
The scouting must have worked. After an inaugural 5-4 season, Coach Hayes' Redskins of 1950 won 9 games, suffering their only loss against the University of Dayton. 2 games from that season stand out more than any others. First was the infamous Snow Bowl game against rival UC.
That was a great football game. It was Woody against Sid. And the interesting thing was that Sid had taken many of the players that were in my class and on my team to Cincinnati. They transferred to Cincinnati. And of course, that always created a great deal of animosity between Woody and Sid. So when the game was to be played, it was kind of like whoever was going to win this game, that coach is going to end up being the head coach of Ohio State.
We played on a sheet of ice, and in the first half, there were moments, minutes, when we could not see the opposite side of the field. The most horrible conditions under which I've ever played But at the same time, after the contest was over, there's no such feeling as beating UC 28-0.
With the victory over UC, Miami earned a Salad Bowl invitation. Ara Parseghian was an assistant on Hayes' staff that year, but he also coached basketball with John Brickles.
So I remember being in a staff meeting, and John Brickles was there, and Woody said, "Are you going to go with us to the Salad Bowl?" And I'm coaching the basketball team, right? And I kind of threw up my hands, and I said, "Well, you better talk to him." I mean, because he was the AD and also the basketball coach. I couldn't make that decision. If I would have said to Woody, yeah, I'm going, and John says, "No, you're not. You're going to coach the team. You've got games coming up." And so Woody looked at John and he said, "John, well, what about it?" And John said, "We'll talk about it later." That was the explosion. I mean, Woody really got hot, got up, and there was a trophy in there that was to be awarded for the most valuable player and so forth. And he grabbed a hold of that and saw to it that it came apart in two pieces by splashing it on the floor. I don't know where you heard this story, but there was a number of the staff members all gathered around. Woody was really mad because John wouldn't make the decision right at that moment. And ultimately, I don't know what transpired between Woody and John, but I got to go to the Salad Bowl.
So Parseghian, Hayes, and the rest of the Redskins left the cold of Oxford for Tempe, Arizona. The Salad Bowl opponent was Arizona State University.
People don't believe years back that it was called the Salad Bowl, but it really was. Now I guess it's the Fiesta Bowl, but in those days it was the Salad Bowl. I've got a jacket to prove it.
I think Arizona State was quite a bit bigger than we are and had a great back. But as I recall in that game, we played some pretty good defense against them at times. And offensively, we broke some big plays. Jim Bailey broke a big 50-yard draw play, and Johnny Pond had a great day, ran for some big gainers. And we played pretty well because that game, I've looked at it film a couple times in the last year or so. And but it's interesting when you look at this 1950 Miami team, you see all the guys are playing in there, they're all small, and there are no face masks. And it looked like a very, very competent high school team.
We played an outstanding football team, and as far as I can remember, it ended at the right time because I think momentum was starting to swing their way. We were running out of gas a little bit. But it was one of the fine experiences I've had as a player, and it's a time that I will never forget.
The Snow Bowl and the Salad Bowl victories were all that Coach Hayes needed to secure the top spot at Ohio State University, where Hayes, over 27 years, became one of the all-time great college football coaches. With Hayes' departure, Miami for the first time recruited one of its own for the head coaching position. Young Ara Parseghian became the obvious choice.
Becoming the head football coach at Miami, it was somewhat of a shock in a sense and a surprise. I was honored by the ultimate decision to hire me, but here I was, a 27-year-old kid with 1 year of freshman coaching at Miami, becoming the head football coach. And I think Paul Brown said it very well. And he said, "Well, I don't think Ara doesn't know what he doesn't know." And I think it's very true. I think you got a lot of energy, you got a lot of feeling and enthusiasm, but maybe you don't have all the basic fundamentals yet. And I think that was very true. I didn't.
We could kid around with Ara, and we thought we had a palsy-walsy relationship with him. But that changed all of a sudden overnight when he became the head coach, and all of a sudden he was the top guy, and we were the soldiers and he was a general.
We lost 3 games that first year that I was at Miami, and I think we won 7. I don't know how we won 7. We had guys like John Pond. I had John, who was also an individual that had come out of the service, more mature, more understanding. That was very important to our success, and because he was an outstanding player. Carmen Koza was on that team and played safety. We had a good football team, but they had a rookie coach. They really did.
Because of his youth and his enthusiasm and everything, I think he imparted an awful lot on the rest of us.
After that first year, Parsegan's Redskins lost only a total of 3 games in the next 4 seasons. In 1954 and 55, Miami won 2 more MAC titles. Oxford native Tyrrell Burton and Bill Mallory picked up where Pont and Koza had left off.
The most impressive thing that I recall about those years was the fact that I thought we had an outstanding football staff. I was old enough to appreciate what coaches go through, and I continually say that I think Ara Parsegan was one of the most progressive and knowledgeable and the most expert at motivating a team as anybody I've ever been around before or since.
There's a lot of good memories because we had great success. Of course, I have to remember the game that Miami came here and beat Indiana, and that was a great thrill, and had the opportunity to be a part of that. Of course, the Cincinnati games were always a great thrill, and the one year that we beat Sid Gilman, that was a great thrill when we beat Cincinnati.
With victories over Northwestern, UC, Dayton, and Xavier, the undefeated 1955 squad might have been one of the best teams Miami has ever fielded. Yet the Redskins were not invited to a postseason bowl.
I thought sure that we were going to get a bowl bid. I was very disappointed, and I have read since that time, I didn't know it at the time when I was coaching, that the reason that they had not chosen us because we didn't have a big enough name and didn't have a big enough following. At least that was the evaluation of the various bowls that were considering us. I think one of them, which was the Gator Bowl in Jacksonville, Florida.
The bowl committees may have overlooked Miami, but Parsegan was not overlooked by former Miami head coach Stu Holcomb. Holcomb hired Parsegan to fill a head coaching vacancy at Northwestern University. Johnny Pont, Miami's star running back in 1949, 50, and 51, was accustomed to receiving many handoffs. In 1956, Pont grabbed probably the biggest handoff in his life. Pont, who had coached the freshman squad at Miami for 3 years, was elevated to the head coaching position by athletic director John Brickles. Pont was recruited by Gilman and played under Blackburn, Hayes, and Parsegan.
You know, from all of them, I picked a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and I'm sort of more or less a composite of the entire group.
What I guess I recall most about John Pont is the fiery character that he personified, and I think that kind of typified the teams that played under him. He was a fiery type of competitor, and he conveyed this in spades, I know, at least through me or to me, and also to the teammates I know that I played with.
After a 7-1-1 transition year, Pont won back-to-back MAC titles in 57 and 58. The most memorable game of Pont's Miami coaching career came in 1962 as Miami downed the Purdue Boilermakers in West Lafayette, Indiana.
When we played Purdue that one year, I think we only used 19 players in the entire ball game, and we're talking about 90 degrees of heat, humidity, and all that kind of stuff. That entire group was a special, special. You mentioned Ernie Kellerman, probably one of the fiercest competitors I've ever known. Absolutely flat out hated to lose.
When we beat Purdue 10-7, the game was voted the upset of the year and is still considered by many as the upset in college football of all time. And I was fortunate enough to throw an 88-yard pass to Bob Jenks that was a pretty big turning point in that game.
The Miami victory over Purdue was certainly a thrilling event in Miami football history, but the players put it in perspective. They say it's not the victories that remain in your mind, but rather the tough losses which stick with you forever.
The Purdue game probably doesn't, that was great. Say that year. The game that sticks out in my mind was the Ohio University game. I think the following week we get beat. You left very upset. How can you do that one week and get beat the next week, And I think to me that stands out more in my mind than the win.
The 1962 season would be Pont's last at Miami. His final game was the Tangerine Bowl in Florida, where Miami lost to the University of Houston. Pont left Miami for Yale. Again, Miami looked to one of its own to lead Miami football. Bo Schembechler got the nod as Miami's head coach.
John David Malone, he's the guy I hired. I mean, they can talk about all the other guys, but when I went down for that interview and we met, I knew I had him. And I made up my mind going in there and just being around him for a little bit. this guy's going to hire the coach. Prickles was the AD, but the key guy was Millett, and I didn't, so I made sure that got my points across to him.
Like Parsegan and Pont before him, this was Schembechler's first head coaching job. During his first year, Miami was just 2-3-1 when they faced the undefeated Bowling Green Falcons.
I didn't want to be the first coach in 25 years when we'd have a losing season, and it looked like it was going to go that way. And we went up to play Bowling Green at Bowling Green. They were 5-0 and the dominant team in the league, and we upset them up there. And Dave Mowry was a key guy for me, one of my captains, and he played a great football game. His brother was on the staff at Bowling Green. That game really sticks out in my memory about as much as any of them. Because, you know, my first year as a head coach, and really, to be honest with you, things were not going very well. And to pull that game out, and then we had a pretty good season the rest of the year, and at least we had a winning season. And we were able to hang in there and then finally win a couple championships in the middle there.
We played out here in Pacific, and we were winning 21-0 at the end of the third quarter, or 20-zip at the end of the third quarter, and lost the ball game 21-20. And we had a few bad calls during the course of the ball game there, and Bo was a little upset. And the official is coming in at halftime to tell us to get ready, and we've had 4 or 5 bad calls that really stalled some drives, or we could have probably had about 30 points at halftime. And, you know, he was ranting and raving in there because we weren't playing real good. Come out the West Coast, you guys are lollygagging around the whole ball of wax. So he's upset. And then we lost the ball game, and he walks in, and there's one of those twist blackboards that go back and forth, and he just, bam, put his fist through it. So we knew we better keep quiet there in the locker room. That was a long trip back.
Success was possible because of the kind of student athletes Schembechler and others could recruit.
I always told all the prospects that came down there, I said, now don't look at our small stadium and think that's the way it's always going to be, because we're going to build a new stadium. And I used to drive up 73 there, and out there in the middle of field was the old beat-up, rusted bulldozer. And I'd always look out there and say, hey, it looks like they might have brought some equipment in to start clearing the way for this new stadium. Now, that was back in the 60s, you know. And so we never really realized it got the stadium till the 80s.
The Redskins, though, remained at Miami Field, and in 1965 and 66, Miami again won 2 consecutive conference titles. From 66 through 68, Bob Babbage led the Miami defense and became Miami's first consensus All-American.
Everybody hustled. There wasn't anybody saying, me, me, me. It was all team. We played as a team defense. We did everything together. We tried to help out in all areas we possibly can. If somebody was hurt, we'd do a little extra to guard in that position. But we just basically worked together very well as a unit.
The Redskins captured additional Tomahawk victories under Schembechler, beating Northwestern, Indiana, and Tulane. Schembechler coached for 6 years at Miami and then made the jump to the head coaching spot at the University of Michigan. He became the 3rd head coach, following Hayes and Parsegan, to leave Miami directly for the fields of Big Ten football.
Yes, Miami is the cradle of coaches. Now, there was a man who, though he never coached, was every bit a part of the cradle tradition. Indeed, became known as the guardian of the cradle. Jay Colville entered Miami as a student in 1921. He was Miami's first full-time athletic trainer, assuming that responsibility in 1927. Jay was a real character, one who added spirit to Miami football teams. He often quipped that he could recognize 1,000 men by the bottoms of their feet. Jay retired in 1969, though continuing to serve Miami's athletic program until he passed away in 1983. Jay is fondly remembered by all those whose lives he touched.
He was the appointed trainer for the boxing Olympic team in 1956. Melbourne, Australia. On the way back, one of the engines on the over-Pacific flight began to flutter a little, and somebody says, I think we ought to lighten the weight, and Cabo says, well, here's my shoes, but don't take my medal.
Jay was our trainer, my trainer. He used to kid me about how thin my ankles were.
And I think they had lost something like 8 or 9 games in a row, and Jay came into the locker room and says, "That's okay, man, you can't win them all."
With all his roughness and toughness and gruffness, after practice, I can always remember this, periodically he would pick apples from his apple tree and put them in the whirlpool in cold water. And we'd come in after practice and there would be all these apples floating around the whirlpool where just hours before there were bodies in there being treated.
He was an incredible man. He would say, take a couple aspirin, boy, you'll be all right. No matter how serious your injury was, he had a knack of getting to you. So much of injury is mental, and he handled that better than anyone I'd ever seen.
Bill Mallory became the 4th straight former Miami player to be called upon to coach the Redskins. It was also Mallory's first head coaching assignment.
It was a dream come true. I think I had hoped that someday maybe I could come back to be head football coach at Miami, and that when that did come about, I'll tell you right now, I was one happy person.
The rivalries at Miami began to change during this time. Miami still continued their heated battles with local rivals UC, Xavier, and Dayton, but the bigger games became those against MAC foes, Bowling Green, Ohio University, and Kent State.
There were a lot of pretty good teams in the league, and you'd had to strap it up each week you played because they were going to be a challenging opponent. So I thought that the league was more balanced when I came back as a head coach.
In 1971, Miami played UC in Oxford for the first time in 66 games. Miami welcomed the Bearcats to Miami Field with a 43-7 trouncing. Mallory's teams put a lot of points on the board and were led by star running back Bob Hitchens. The Redskins were even better known for their tough defenses and outstanding team effort. The defensive squad was coached by Dick Crum.
Well, that was the #1 defensive team in the country. And, we were not a very big defense.
In 1973, the Redskins were a perfect 10-0. A postseason challenge awaited. Miami was invited to play in the Tangerine Bowl, where they were to meet the University of Florida in Gainesville.
They figured they'd just have a little mop-up against Miami of Ohio, and we went down there, and not only did we beat them 16-7, I believe, but we beat them at their own place.
That was a tough ball game. Florida's wide receivers were bigger than our tackles, and our guys got after them, and I think we shocked them. I don't think they were ready for guys to come at them and hit them like that. And they didn't get across our 50-yard line in the first half.
Of course, not many people, I think, thought that we would match up very well against Florida because they were a pretty good football team. But the way that team took that field and the way they played and got the job done, that was a real satisfying feeling. And
Miami defeated Florida 16-7 and finished the season 11-0. Coach Mallory's abilities were recognized nationally. Colorado finally made an offer Bill Mallory could not refuse. Mallory moved to the Big 8 school, but after 5 seasons in Oxford, had established one of Miami's most dominant reigns of all time. Bill Mallory was the 4th consecutive Miami graduate who was named head coach at Miami. It had been almost 25 years since a non-Miamian was head coach. A habit was formed, and habits are sometimes hard to break. Dick Crum, the brilliant Miami assistant, was a candidate for the top coaching spot, but he was not a Miami graduate, and some thought it was inappropriate to give him the job.
He really was a member of the Miami family. He had been here 5 years. His wife had gotten a degree from here. He had a son that was attending school here, and we just thought that Dick Crum was Miami, and he was affiliated with it, and he belonged to the cradle of coaches.
Coach Crum carried forth what he and Mallory had started. The defending MAC champions successfully defended their title, but it was no cakewalk. The Mid-American Conference is tough, very tough, competitive, and well-balanced. Kent State had an outstanding team in 1974. The previous season, Miami dealt a crushing blow to the Golden Flashes, who were seeking a conference championship and a bowl bid. Kent State was looking for revenge.
It was a seesaw battle back and forth, and we were up on them 16-10. I think we'd missed an extra point. And they scored with about 58 seconds to go in the game. And the first play, they chased Steve Santa. I mean, he was in the end zone before he threw the ball. They kicked off the ball, went out of the end zone, and he finally got rid of the ball. And the second down, the thing was incomplete, so we took Steve out and put Sherman in a quarterback. And we pitched the ball to Randy Walker, and he started on a sweep and turned around and threw the ball back to Sherman. And he got out to about Kent's 40-yard line, and we hit 2 out cuts, and then Dave Drought came in and kicked about I guess the field goal was about 32 yards. And we won 19-17, and there were still 13 seconds on the clock, and I told one of the assistants, I said, geez, I hope we didn't score too soon.
After a second consecutive undefeated season, the Redskins were invited back to the Tangerine Bowl. Miami beat Georgia 21-10. In 1975, Miami lost for the first time in 3 years, losing by an extra point at Michigan State. But that didn't stop this team from winning. By season's end, Miami captured its 3rd consecutive conference crown. Miami again was invited to defend its Tangerine Bowl title, and this time they faced the University of South Carolina.
It was a good game. It was the highlight, basically, of our Tangerine Bowl experience, because that next year, the Tangerine Bowl committee decided not to renew the contract with the Mid-American League, that we had done too much damage to the teams that they put up against us.
Miami had again defeated a Southeastern opponent and moved its postseason bowl record to 5 wins and 1 defeat. 3 seasons, 3 conference championships, and 3 Tangerine Bowl victories. Miami had an off year in 1976 and had a losing season for the first time since World War II. But Crum once again led the Redskins to a MAC title in 1977. Like his predecessors, Coach Crum was sought out to lead a much larger school to football respectability. This time, North Carolina called for Crum. Miami again looked for a head coach who realized and lived the Miami tradition. Tom Reed played under Bo Schembechler during the mid-60s and was brought back to Miami.
It was a unique experience. I mean, something I've always dreamed about, having played there, and the school being very special to you as a person, and especially, as a football coach, to come back and coach there was just a dream come true.
Miami only won 1 of its first 4 games under Tom Reed and faced the North Carolina squad, now coached by Dick Crum, in the 5th game of the year.
Miami came in there and beat us 7-3, and those were all our kids, and I felt good for them, but it was tough on us.
The Redskins went on to an 8-2-1 season, winning the last 7 games. More importantly, Reed kept up a more distinguished and important tradition at Miami.
We graduated 62 of 62 seniors. That's not to say that everyone came in graduated, but those who were seniors in our program in the last 3 years all graduated. And I think that's very important. I think the wins are going to come on the football field, and being around it long enough, it's going to happen, the championships. But you have to have that foundation of what you're at the university for, and really stress it.
Winning on Miami Field became academic, but after 87 years, Miami Field hosted its last game.
I was there for the last game. Some young guy sold me this for $1. It's a little bottle of dirt, and it sits on my desk. So it must be a little bit some happy memories from there.
The crowds were tremendous. The band was good. The cheerleaders. I mean, it was just almost a Norman Rockwell Saturday afternoon.
It was electrifying. I mean, everybody was there. It was close. A lot of noise. You knew when you got on the field that you had a distinct advantage. You were at home, and the other team better worry about it because you had everybody in those stands on your side. It was a tremendous feeling.
Central Michigan had the unenviable task of trying to overcome Miami Magic on November 6, 1982. But the Chippewas weren't the only ones under pressure.
If I'd ever felt pressure in football, that was it. Every day we went to practice, I had our young men stop in the middle of Miami Field and told them about Paul Brown and Weeb Eubank and Bo Schembechler and Eric Parseghian. They played and they had coached there, and they're playing the game for every man who had ever stepped foot in that field. It's all coming to a point in this one game on Miami Field. The last hurrah. I mean, you just could not leave that field without a win.
Miami Field had closed the same way it was opened. Miami closed out Central Michigan 23-0 and closed out the wonderful era of Miami Field. After 5 years at Miami, Tom Reed was ready for a bigger challenge at a bigger school. Reed packed up in Oxford and headed out east to coach the Wolfpack at North Carolina State.
After long years of planning and development, Yager Stadium finally replaced Old Miami Field and was dedicated on October 1st, 1983. Funded partially by a bequest from Fred C. Yager, graduate of the class of 1914, the stadium and the related sports complex constitutes today one of the finest athletic facilities in America. The birth of Yager Stadium also brought about the birth of Miami's most recent mascot, Tom O'Hawk. Miami's other mascot, of course, is Chief Miami. Miami was known as the Big Red until 1928, when the Miami publicity director formally began to refer to the university as the Redskins. In 1961, the university authenticated the use of the Indian mascot, modeled after the Miami Indian tribe.
To date, everything that happens on that field that is worn by the costume of the Miami Redskin is absolutely authentic. Those are registered eagle feathers. That's a uniform that's made by the tribe on the reservation, and it's that kind of authenticity that I think brings great honor upon the university and the Native Americans for whom we carry their name.
The university and the tribe Miami have a signed pact which proclaims that this relationship shall continue as long as the wind shall blow. Other colorful rooters have included Harry Toby, a boisterous character decked entirely in red and white, who always predicted a Miami victory, and Clyde Shears, who could be found in the Miami cheering section, sporting a raccoon coat and a megaphone. Each added excitement to the game and made Miami special.
Tim Rose became very familiar with Miami football as a player at Xavier University in the early 1960s. Rose was the defensive coordinator at Miami under Tom Reed. He was chosen as Reed's successor and now ushered in the new era of Yager Stadium.
When the Yager Stadium in the year 2060 was torn down, they're playing rollerball down there. And I'll be able to say, doggone it, I was there when the stadium closed in '82 as a coach. I was there to be a part of the new stadium. It's just to be a part of it. Apart from the wins and losses, just to be a part of it. I still feel very lucky because Miami is such a storied football traditional school.
The Redskins under Tim Rose struggled with back-to-back 4 and 7 seasons in '83 and '84. In '85, the team went 8-2-1, and in 1986, the Redskins added another page to that storied tradition. That year, Miami won a conference championship, participated in a postseason bowl game, and defeated former Miami grid star Bill Arnsparger and his 6th-ranked LSU Tigers.
That was a great setting. It was an unbelievably great opportunity, and everything was right. And yet we had to go out and seize it. I'm not diminishing our players' abilities or our players' talents or performance that night. It was magnificent. So the plan was to give us a chance to win, to stay healthy, not to get fatigued in the humidity down there. And really, you know, it was a game that our entire squad's confidence grew with each quarter, each big play. But if I were to tell you here today, 2 years later, that I planned, we thought we were going to win that game, I'd be lying. I wanted to get down there, play well, not get hurt, and prepare us to be a champion the rest of the way. But those kids just made it happen. It was a surprise to me as it was 86,000 people that night.
Miami had been in the position to be the giant killer because athletic director Dick Schreider had been able to schedule such opportunities.
I think our athletes at Miami should have an opportunity to play in the finest facilities in the country and against the finest competition in the country. Some of the big games that are coming up, of course, are 5 we've got scheduled with Michigan State. We've got North Carolina on the schedule. We got Purdue on there. We have Notre Dame on the schedule.
In 1986, Miami went on to capture its 13th Mid-American Championship on the last game of the season. Then the Redskins went on to the California Bowl in Fresno, where they were defeated by the San Jose State Spartans.
When you come to Miami, whether you're a football player, football coach, student manager, student, if you care at all about the game and if you're cognizant of what all that's going on here, I think the feeling is you're going to be a champion here. It's the way it is at Miami. Somewhere along the line, you're going to be a champion. And we hadn't achieved that in the 3 years previous. So I think the '86 championship was one that just, and I said this before, just kind of made us feel like we belong. Not on a personal basis, but as a team, as a staff, as a program. Doggone it, we've now done what all those other great guys have done, those other great players and teams. It was really a feeling of accomplishment.
In 1988, Tim Rose, Miami's 29th head football coach, continues to keep Miami's deep-rooted football tradition alive. The legends are so numerous, the program so successful, and the tradition so proud.
And I think part of my life started when I left Richmond, Indiana, and came to Miami University. And everything has been very positive for me. Very fortunate to have met a lot of the people that helped me along.
Where else could you go to a college that looked just like a college should look? Once you go there and take a look, you fall in love with it.
The academics have gotten awfully strong, and yet the Miami tradition of winning is still there. and the physical facilities are matchless.
It's a great institution. It attracts good people, and when you put the two together, you know, you're bound to have a certain amount of success.
I think that Miami, and I say this with my heart, and I say it with my mind, is the epitome of colleges.
I've encouraged every youngster that has shown even the least amount of interest in Miami to select that school because of the way I feel about it.
Guys that really play ball there are playing because they want to play.
I don't know that any of us can ever, after our life's been completed, say that, well, we gave back what we got. I really believe that. There was something unique about the place. There still is.
I have a great deal of pride and feel from Miami, as I know everybody does. And you just hope that maybe in some small way that you can represent it in a real class fashion.
You know, when I remember Miami, that's basically what I remember, the character of the people that I played with and the character of the people that ran the place when I was here.
College athletics, college football doesn't get any better than this.
We have a beautiful campus, and that's important. We have a great academic tradition, and that's great. And we have fine athletic tradition, and I'm proud of that. But the greatest thing are the Miami people.
There's a special feeling about Miami University, a feeling of accomplishment which comes from hard work, a feeling of loyalty to a school which gave you purpose. Miami University football strengthens and enhances those feelings. It has truly been a century of success.